Hello everybody and welcome to A&W Sports. This is going to be our first A&W podcast. And I lied about getting the A on here. We needed to get out a video, so here it is. The ranking of all things Spring League, the podcast. We're going to start with the USFL, and there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of news. USFL just dropped a whole bunch of, news. Dropped the schedule, dropped their new logos and their uniforms, hired a whole bunch of people. Houston Gamblers got ripped off, I would say. But let's just go over and rank a whole bunch of stuff. Y'all already know my opinions about the jerseys. You can watch that video about it. But first off, let's talk the quarterbacks. These are the top 8 quarterbacks in my opinion. Which number 1 will be Jordan Ta'amu. I think he's a really flashy guy. He showed big stuff out in the XFL in St. Louis. A lot of fans loved him. He was widely considered the second best quarterback. I would tend to agree with that. He was really fast. He could have the run, pass option. He's just a solid quarterback in the NFL. He hasn't done much. But that's number 1 for me. I think Tampa Bay got a bit of a steal there. Number 2 or 3, it doesn't really matter to me. Shea Patterson and Paxton Lynch. Let's talk about Paxton Lynch first of all. He's got potential. I'll say that much. Not a lot of people liked him. His time in Denver was not good at all, but I think with the right coaching, right people around him, I think he'll do a great job. And Shea Patterson, he did great in both his places, Ole Miss and Michigan. So I think he'll be pretty good. I think he'll do good. I've seen a couple highlights. He's been persistent. Not quite NFL elite, but he's still pretty good. And then number 4, Clay Thorson. Now a lot of people, if you watch their highlights, Clay Thorson is going to be at the very bottom of the list, 7 or 8. I think that's a little too hard. I went through and watched a whole bunch of Clay Thorson highlights. He's a consistent guy. He's got just that college football arm. Northwestern isn't necessarily a bad school. He was a 4-star recruit. He's bounced around practice squads and NFL teams, but in college he was pretty good. And I think, that Houston coach, Kevin Sumlin, I think he'll have something to do with Thorson. I think he'll be pretty good. Brian Scott with the Philadelphia Stars. Now Scott, he was a big time player for the Generals in the Spring League. The Spring League has a bit of a facelift with the USFL, but Brian Scott, he was a 2-time MVP, and I think that if he keeps it up, he'll have a very great career in the USFL, because he's not NFL quality stuff, but I think he's good enough for the USFL. Right below him, number 6, Ben Holmes. He's got a deep ball. I've watched a bunch of stuff. He can throw it deep, and he's pretty accurate too. Now a lot of people have him at dead last, which might be fair, it might not, but I like his deep ball, which is why he's above Kyle Sloter. Now Kyle Sloter's a bit of a meme, everyone's calling him, which I think is fair. Kyle Sloter, he popped off in the preseason, but he hasn't done too much in a regular season, and he just bounces around practice teams. It's pretty good in the Vikings territory up in Minnesota. But now he's in New Orleans, the New Orleans Breakers quarterback. I know a bunch of people are excited for him. I'll get on the hype train if I see big stuff go up. And lastly, Alex Mago. I don't have too much to say about him. I don't like the pick. He's the widest dual threat option that I've ever seen in a quarterback. He runs so he looks like a white boy when he runs. He can run. He's a dual threat, but it's a bit messy to watch him on his highlights. Now I didn't rank the logos, so we're going to go rank the logos. and we're going to get to some big stuff later on, a big summary of the USFL. And first, no, we'll start in last place. In last place, for just the primary logos, we have the Houston Gamblers. I don't like the Houston Gamblers. The G goes the wrong way, the star is out of proportion, and I'm going to be a Houston fan because I'm from Houston, but I don't like the logo at all. Number 7, right above the Gamblers, is the Maulers. It's a weird logo. The word Maulers is a bit wacky. The orange and blue, purple, it's a weird color. I think Clemson pulls it off, but Clemson also has years and years of history with it. The Maulers just came out, and I'm not the biggest fan of the Maulers. Number 6, the Birmingham Stallions. It's an okay logo. It's nothing too amazing. I think with the oversaturation of the color red in this league, it dulls it a little bit. But all in all, they did a good job, and I think if they spiced up different team colors, this would be higher on my list. Number 5, we have, number 5, the Tampa Bay Bandits. I like the uniform, the logo. It's simple, it's a horse with a guy riding on it. Nothing more to say about that. Number 4, the Generals. The Generals stayed away from the Spring League's version of the Generals, which I was honestly a little bit surprised. They stuck with a little more blue. They went back to the very 80s version. It's number 4 because it's got a bit of nostalgia. I might have put that a little lower, but Donald Trump owned the team, so it couldn't be that bad. And then number 3, we have the Philadelphia Stars. I've been wanting there to be a team with red, orange, and yellow for so long, and to finally get the Philadelphia Stars, this really made me happy. I was super happy. Number 2, the Michigan Panthers, not the Detroit Panthers, because no one wants to be associated with Detroit football. Michigan Panthers, I really like the logo. The blue, I think, looks nice. A lot of people have this lower on the list, but I think the Panther looks very aggressive, very cool. Some would call it cold, and I would agree with that. I like the Panther, that's why it's number 2. And finally, number 1, we have the New Orleans Breakers. I wanted a team to just be called like the Tsunami or the Breakers, and I think New Orleans Breakers, it's a cool name. They've got a really cool logo, and I really like it. For the secondary logos, first place we have Birmingham, Alabama. Second place we have the Maulers. Third place we have Michigan. Fourth place we have New Jersey with like the NJ. And you see the pictures. We're definitely getting rougher when we get to Philadelphia. Philadelphia Stars and the Bells, that's just oof. And at the very bottom, all these are just last place, but I had to put them in order: Houston, New Orleans, and Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is probably the best out of all those, and Houston's probably the worst. So, they're all just secondary logos. You're not really going to see too much of them unless you're on Twitter. Let's talk about coaches. For Houston, Kevin. For Kevin Sumlin, he was a coach for the Arizona Wildcats and the Texas A&M Aggies. He beat Nick Saban with, what's his name? Johnny Manziel. I think with that, he might have a great choice in quarterbacks. Let's hope that Clay Thorson for the Gamblers really works out. Not too much is being touted about the Gamblers being that good of a team. And then a lot of these other guys, I have no clue. Bart Andrews for Philadelphia, I know played for the European Football League. But that's the main summary of the USFL. Now, to just give up a little background, one big thing is they're having to face a lawsuit. The USFL is getting sued by, you guessed it, the USFL. And the way this, I think, went over is the USFL bought all the naming rights to it, but they didn't buy the history to the USFL. So the old USFL, the people they bought all the trademarks from, don't like how they didn't buy like the history of the old USFL. So they're suing them, and it's a real messy situation. So if nothing goes through before the end of the year, I think the USFL will be able to get a season off. But if this turns out to be a legitimate problem, then we're not going to see the USFL for a second season. Another thing that might cause there to not be a second season is money. This whole season has been a low-cost investment by Fox Sports and Brian Woods. Everything has been done to cut costs. So that's why we're only going to have games in Birmingham, Alabama and Canton, Ohio. Not a lot of money will be made from ticket sales. They're 10-day passes for the whole day. And that is not a lot of money at all. This season is strictly to get investors. And if they don't get investors, or at least the ones that they need, there's not going to be a second USFL season. They also need better cities. Now there's already a couple YouTube videos out there on how the USFL picked the worst cities, and I would tend to agree. They all have some sort of football team already there. They have Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. They've got the Eagles and the Steelers there. And then you've got the Panthers, Michigan Panthers. Now, if it's not just Michigan, but it's like Detroit. But I think that's like the only place that you can really put a football team, unless you want to go to Lansing. Let me see here. The Generals, they're touting it as the New Jersey Generals. But I feel like everyone knows that's going to be Brooklyn, New Jersey. So a lot of fans are mad that it's just all teams with pre-existing NFL teams. Let me see here. Houston has a team. They also have the XFL team. That might be subject to move. Tampa Bay didn't even have good XFL attendance. And New Orleans, who is not the best location because we have no information on New Orleans. So, if I was the USFL, I would have picked these teams. Just a second, let me find it. I would have picked these teams. Now, I think the XFL might do this. First off, you have Orlando and San Antonio. And these teams were from the AAF. And we had the Orlando Apollos and the San Antonio Commanders. The average attendance for Orlando was about 19,000, 20,000, around there. It went up and it went down. Next, we had the San Antonio Commanders, which they had peaked at 30,000 fans, but their average attendance was about 27,000. Next, for the XFL cities, we had St. Louis and Seattle. Both of these were above 20,000. Seattle had about 24,000, but not a lot of fans were showing up. But that's just probably because of the bad team there. St. Louis, they had great fans. They were brinking on the edge of 50,000. Had the 6th week not been canceled to COVID. And then here are a couple just stranger cities. I think that we could keep DC for the DC Defenders. But if we wanted to move them, I would move them to like Mexico City, Toronto, or Albuquerque, New Mexico. But I think the best case for DC would just keep the DC Defenders in DC. Now, I'm pretty sure none of y'all know what the UFL was, but it was like the start of the new spring football leagues. And they had one successful team with fans in Omaha, Nebraska. They played in a baseball stadium. I think this might be, if the XFL were to move a team, it would be moving them to Omaha. I would think if they moved the team, the Vipers, they would move them to Orlando, and the Renegades to San Antonio. And then Oakland. Now, here's what I'm a little split on, is do we want to move the LA Wildcats to Oakland, or do we want to use the New York Guardians and move them to Oakland? I would tend to put the LA Wildcats in Oakland and put the Guardians in Columbus, Ohio. Now, Columbus, Ohio had a very high viewership count from all the data that we could find, and there were actually a lot of XFL fans in Columbus, Ohio, which is why I would say that. I did not make this list specifically for USFL, but I think this thing still applies. These are teams that have shown, cities that have shown at least a lot of interest, with Orlando and San Antonio. Excuse me. Omaha, they showed interest with the UFL. Oakland just lost an NFL team. A lot of people say they could move to San Diego, but I was looking through and San Diego didn't really have a sports facility to play at, which would cause problems. So that's why I say Orlando, San Antonio, Seattle, St. Louis, Omaha, Oakland, Columbus, and Washington, D.C. would be the best places for a spring football league. As an expansion team, I was thinking maybe Albuquerque, New Mexico, and maybe Mexico City or Toronto, but we're not there right now. Back to the USFL, though. Let me just finish up with this. USFL put out contracts where they could swap players for another year, just so the XFL doesn't get them. I think the chances of a second year happening are about under 30%. I think the USFL needs to really show brightness here, and with the whole lawsuit situation, I think they need to have that just be swept under the rug, and they need to outstandingly win that lawsuit. So that's all the stuff that I have for the USFL. Now for the XFL, let's just talk about that real quick. I know there's a lot of people mad that the XFL isn't putting out any real news on Twitter. I mean, they'll post something every now and then. Like today they posted like something about Danny Garcia owning a football team. No, a football league. And I was like, well, I don't care. Give us actual news, and I might actually like this post. But the big thing with the XFL is they haven't shown too much online presence. However, they have shown activity. I've gotten a couple emails from them just like, hey, we're still alive. Don't worry. We're actually hiring people. We're getting stuff ready. However, it's a lot of behind the scenes, and I think some fans would just like a little bit of insight into the behind the scenes. Now, I'm with the End Zone Sports on this. You can look them up, link in the description. They have already released logos and uniforms, so they can't release those, and those are usually the big things. Other than that, it's just announcing coaches and announcing the draft, and after that, nothing too big happens. But they've already put out 2 out of 4 of their big announcements, and the only thing that might happen is the Houston Roughnecks problem. Now, in 2020, I believe, or it might have been 2021, the Houston Roughnecks had to give up their copyright to the Houston Roughnecks. Yes, 2021. They had to give up their copyright to the first and their secondary logo. Because the first logo looked too much like the Oilers, and the secondary logo, I'm not sure how they figured this one out, looked too much like the New England Patriots. So they lost that lawsuit, and they're not allowed to use the copyright anymore on that. So that might issue a change of uniform, but I know it's definitely going to issue the change in the logos. Now that's one thing, and I think if they move them up to Omaha, Nebraska, they could still use an Oiler type logo. Now give out this bit of information, and if I'm looking way too far into it, that's my loss. So I was looking up concept logos for the Roughnecks 2023 just to see if anyone had put out like a concept logo or uniform for them. And I found this one, and it was an orange oil rig, like what they have out inland, not like the big telephone tower, but here's the picture of it. And the oil rig I saw, and I was like, man, I really like that. And it was like right after the lawsuit that they lost. And about 2 weeks later, I went, looked it up, and that picture had vanished from Google Images. Now, could that be that the XFL picked it up, took it off? I'm not sure. It's a concept logo, but that's just one thing out there. The Houston Roughnecks do have to get a whole new rebrand, have to get new paraphernalia, new hat, new everything. But let's just go over the logos from 2020. We're going to ignore the Houston Roughnecks because these notes are a little old. So we're going to skip the Houston Roughnecks, and we're going to rank everything from bottom to top. So number 7, we have, well, I'll just do number 8. My very bottom is the Vipers. For logos, this could also be the Dragons. I wasn't big for the V. I feel like it was a bit lazy. And no one really knew what the yellow part of the V was. Number 7, we have the Dragons. The dragon just looks a little corny. It's a little too deep. I don't know if you know what I mean, but like it's just a weird logo. Number 6, we have LA. It's an L and it's an A. I feel like this is just lazy. No excuses. I feel like we could have come up with a really cool secondary logo, which they failed to do that too. We'll get to that later, though. Number 5, we have the Renegades. For the Dallas Renegades, this was a really cool logo. The mask, the eyes, the hat, even it looked really nice. Number 4, Houston Roughnecks, just the oil derrick. Now we can just ignore that because they don't own the rights to that anymore. Number 3, we have the DC Defenders. Number 2, we have the St. Louis Battlehawks. Now we can just skip the Defenders. There's not too much, just a couple lightning bolts and stars. And then the Battlehawks was a sword with wings. That was a pretty cool logo. And number 1, the New York Guardians. That was pretty cool. And then for the secondary logos, we had New York Guardians. I think that was a pretty cool logo. The N, Y, and the G, just all intermingled in there. Then we had for number 2, the Renegades. The R inside the circle is weird, but I liked it. Number 3, we had the St. Louis Battlehawks. That was a pretty cool logo with the arch and the wings coming out from the arch. Number 4, we had the Vipers. That was a cool head. Like this head. Nothing too fancy. And number 5, we had the Houston Roughnecks secondary logo, but that doesn't really apply anymore. Number 6, we had the Seattle Dragons. Now, if you look up Seattle Dragons secondary logo, it's actually going to be a little hard to find, but I found the patent of it. And it's a pretty cool logo with the tail and the fire coming out on both ends. And then number 6, we have, no, not number 6, number 7, we have the LA Wildcats. Look at this claw coming through. It's just, I don't like this logo at all. It's horrible. And number 8, I couldn't find the Dallas Renegade, not the Dallas Renegade, I couldn't find the DC Defenders logo. Secondary. So, I'm just going to move on from that. Stadiums. Now, these are going to be stadiums ranked for how they fit their team. I think number 1, Audi Field in Washington, D.C. was a very comfortable fit. It was about 20,000 capacity. I feel like they fit that pretty well. The St. Louis Superdome, that was about to be fit really well. They were only using the bottom half of the stadium. However, they were about to open the top for the 6th week, but they got closed down with all the COVID and everything. Number 3, TDECU Stadium with a capacity of 40,000 fans. Houston was showing a gradual uptick in fans showing up to games. And they never actually crossed half capacity, but they were really, really close, with the top attendance being like 19,000 and a little bit. Number 4, we had the LA Galaxy, also Dignity Health Stadium. This was too big for the LA fan base, which was already really small. But it was a decent stadium. And I think number 5 and number 4 could be switched. CenturyLink Park for Seattle. The Dragons fans really showed up. It was actually a decent-sized place. There were talks after the first week about switching the stadium, after the second week, I'm sorry, about switching the stadium to the top and lower deck, but that never came to pass. Then number 6, we had Ranger Park, and this stadium was actually getting too big as the season went on, because at the very last game of the Rangers Park for the Renegades, they only had 15,000 fans show off, so it was showing a bit of a drop-off. Then number 7 and number 8, MetLife and Raymond James Stadium in New York and in Tampa Bay. Both of these stadiums were vastly too big for the teams that played there. They have upwards of 70,000, 80,000 fans that can fit inside, and they were polling the lowest numbers in the entire league. So these stadiums were much too big for the teams that played in them. Now, if we look at the best team, we all know that was Houston. Number 2 was St. Louis. Number 3 was DC. Now, number 1, Houston with P.J. Walker and Cam Phillips, that dynamic duo. It was hard to stop, and every team showed it. Their defense was a little finicky at times, though. Number 2, St. Louis. Jordan Teamu was really the one-man band that St. Louis saw. Number 3, the DC Defenders. They showed a fairly great crowd for their team. Their defense was okay, and what's his name? Cardell Jones. He was a good starter. He played 2 good games at the very beginning. But something happened, and he dropped off near the end. Now, that could have been that he's more of a home team player, and he doesn't like playing away games. But nevertheless, he was just causing problems. Their defense was okay. Number 4, Dallas. Now, here's the big thing, is the Dallas coach, and I don't remember his name, and Landry Jones, they couldn't agree on the style of offense to use. You may wonder what I'm talking about. Is the Dallas coach, he wanted a quick air raid offense. He wanted to move down and get as many plays in a short amount of time. Landry Jones, however, wanted to take time. He wanted to look at the scheme across from him, and this just caused problems between the quarterback and the coach and how they wanted to individually play. Number 5, the Guardians, the New York Guardians. This was funny. I think even a mid-range XFL fan will remember this moment when Matt LeGloin walks off the field and says right before halftime that we need to change the entire offensive scheme because it's not working. He was a bit of a crybaby, and no one really liked him. So, just that quarterback problems, and their defense was okay. Their defense was showing hope, but I think the offense was shutting down its own defense. Number 6, we had the LA Wildcats, and they were starting to pick up near the end of the season. They got that big win against Cardell Jones. Landry Jones. Let me see, just a second. Who was that quarterback for the Renegades? This is a podcast. I'll just edit it all out. Renegade quarterback. What's his name? Landry Jones. Okay, I was right. It was Landry Jones. Let me see here. And then LA with Josh Johnson. They were starting to pick up near the end of the season. However, Houston put a sound and firm spanking on them, which, I think that's just a little too hard to overcome. And number 2 is they didn't have a home crowd because it's LA, and LA doesn't like football. Then number 7, we have the Seattle Dragons. They were showing sparks of hope, and they played exceptionally well against the Roughnecks at the very, very end of the game. However, some would say it was down to just bad refereeing, but the Dragons had a decent secondary quarterback, and I think Brandon Silvers was a little over-touted at the quarterback position. And then finally, number 8, we have the Tampa Tampa Bay Vipers. Oh goodness, where do I even start? The Tampa Bay Vipers, their star quarterback, Quentin Flowers, would see the field and score a touchdown, and then only on the next drive to be benched for the starting quarterback, Aaron Murray, who consequently could not get anything going. And you could hear on TV the Vipers fans chanting, "We want Flowers." So, or Cornelius, but Cornelius, he was a tall guy. He could run, and it was a bit of a problem to tackle. However, everyone wanted Quentin Flowers, but the coach, he could not make up his mind on the quarterback, and this caused so many problems for the entire offense. Their defense was okay, and they nearly pulled out a win. Come to think of it, really, the only two teams that almost didn't beat the Roughnecks were the Wildcats and the Renegades. Everyone else was actually fairly close. But yeah, just the whole Tampa Bay team, it was a bit of a mess offensively for that quarterback position. And I don't know what the coach was thinking, but he couldn't make up his mind on who he wanted. Now, when it comes to fans, we have St. Louis, Dragons, Houston. Number 8 at the very bottom for fan attendance and just fan support of their team was the LA Wildcats. To be fair, no one goes to the LA Chargers or Rams games for the NFL, so I don't think the XFL should feel too bad, other than just wasting time, money, and energy in putting a team in LA. I think their average attendance was somewhere around 13,000. Not a whole lot of fans that ever showed up. Right above that is Tampa Bay, with the same problem, 13,000 fans, not to mention they were in Raymond James Stadium, which only made the fan base look even more scant. Number 6, we had the New York Guardians, which, same problem, with a stadium vastly too big, and with a fan base vastly too small. Hovering around the same area, they had a couple fans for the first game, but it was dropping off quickly and substantially as the season went on. Number 4, we had DC. Now DC, the fans were starting to show a bit of a dip. Now the 6th week, it was actually supposed, right before COVID shut it down, a lot of these teams were expecting a renaissance in the fan attendance. Now DC, they were going down. Their average fan attendance was about 17,000. Number 3, we had Houston, and they were actually going up in fan attendance. And their next game was supposed to have about 20,000, and their last game, their third game at home against the Seattle Dragons, had about, they had about 19,000 fans. And then number 2, we had the Seattle Dragons, but that was dropping off because of just bad team. No one wants to go see a bad team. And then number 1, St. Louis, who is only expected to get more and more fans. So, if I'm going to go and change anything, here's what I'm going to do. Number 8, I think we do move LA to Oakland, as I already said. However, the only Coliseum in Oakland to hold that many fans is the Oakland Coliseum, that has sewage problems and is vastly too big for the A's that play there for the MLB. It's a dual-purpose stadium, and having a baseball field and a football field, it'd just be a bit of a problem. Now, the only other stadium in Oakland would be the California Bears. However, there's not really any parking nearby, and it's still a rather large stadium for a spring league. So maybe Oakland or maybe San Diego, but San Diego recently destroyed the home of the Chargers. Number 7, I would move the Tampa Bay Vipers to Orlando. They had enough fans for the AAF. I think that would be a wise choice. Number 6, I'd change NYC to Columbus, Ohio, because it's just like the TV support on Ohio, and Ohio fans are a bit weird. But I don't think it would be financially responsible of the NFL to just keep a team in New York. They already have 3 football teams there, and I think the XFL is just one more money pit for the people of New York. Number 5, we have Dallas. Now, I would move Dallas personally to San Antonio to the Alamo Dome. That would, I think, fit them perfectly. The fans really showed up for the AAF, and that was a league that failed because they never had money from ticket sales. And then number 4, we have DC. I would keep DC the same, but number 3, Houston. Now here's the big thing with Houston is we had a lot of fans. However, out of all the different teams, Houston's the only one with like the major problem of we had fans, but now we have the USFL is actively in Houston with the Gamblers. Even though they're playing their games in Birmingham right now, they have the Gamblers that would probably take away a lot of time and money, and not to mention no one shows up for the Houston Texans games because the Houston Texans are poo-poo. Number 2, Seattle. I would just try to get a better team in Seattle, better group of players, because the fans were leaving because the football wasn't even good. Now, if you have a bad football team, you're always going to have pretty bad attendance. However, I think Seattle had one of the worst teams on the field. But they at least had fans. Now, whether with COVID and everything that would still be the case, who knows? You just have to gamble and find out if Seattle really is where you want to have a team. The number 1, St. Louis, don't change them. You had everything right. When it comes to uniforms, number 8, now the uniforms were all pretty alright for the XFL, but if we're really going to nitpick number 8, it's the Vipers, the green with a different shade of green and the white helmet. It's a weird look. Not to mention their away uniform, it looks weird. Now number 7, this is arguably worse than the Vipers with the white helmet and the green, the army green and the navy blue and just the bright orange. It's a really weird match, and I don't think that the designers were able to pull it off. Those are my only 2 real uniforms that I don't like. Everything else is pretty uphill from there. Number 6, we have the Dallas Renegades. I mean, it's an alright alright uniform, but it's just not as good as the rest, really. Number 6, we have the Battlehawks. I really like the helmet with the Battlehawks. Number 4, the Houston Roughnecks. I like the star on the sleeve. The silver helmet's alright enough. Now here's the thing, they're probably going to have to get a new logo or something with the new logo in New Jersey with the logo problems that they're having. And then number 3, we have the New York Guardians. I really, really like this uniform. The black looks really nice. The red on the black is also really nice. Then number 2, we have the not the St. Louis Wildcats. Number 2, we have the LA Wildcats. I think the black, the red, and a little bit of orange. Now, the orange on the white uniform just looks really nice. And then number 1, we have the DC Defenders, which I think it is beautiful in its simplicity. I've been recording for 38 minutes. Wow. Just mindless babbling about leagues that no one watches. Anyway, the DC Defenders, yeah, they're beautiful in their simplicity. Now, if we're going to rank the XFL to USFL, I have a little thing right here. When it comes to logos and jerseys, I think the XFL blows it away. The USFL has way too much red in their logos and in their jerseys. When it comes to money, the XFL has a major investing firm with Redbird Capital, and they also have Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Danny Garcia pouring in a whole lot of money into the league too. When it comes to the USFL, they have progress. The USFL has started within the year and is going to be on the field within a year, whereas the XFL has had 2 years to plan, and they're moving pretty slow, and not a lot of people know what's happening. There's not a lot of official statements. coming out other than just giving Danny Garcia a nice little picture taker. Popularity, I think the XFL is more popular than the USFL because the USFL has died and a lot of fans are equating the USFL to the AAF once again, just trying to get a league out within a year, and I don't think fans are too big on that. When it comes to leaders, I think the XFL, if they wanted to get more done, I mean, they hired great hires in my opinion. However, when it comes to actually getting stuff done, the USFL has gotten so much more done than the XFL has. And then for the schedule, the USFL is staying on track and staying on time. Now, when Dwayne The Rock Johnson got on to like the Manning cast at the start of the postseason, he was on between the Arizona Cardinals and the LA Rams. He said that, 2 to 3 weeks, you'd have some big news. It was 4 weeks before we even got a pipe out of the XFL. So I think the USFL is sticking to its schedule a lot better. Now, granted, the XFL said that, but, the Super Bowl was happening. But here's what the XFL needs to do to get itself ready for game day. First off, they need to get their fans back and running again. They need to get those hires of coaches. That's coming up soon. I think they might want to wait a little bit. They also need to get the Houston Roughnecks thing situated and make an official statement on where teams and cities will be, because they've said that they're going to change them, and they've also said that they're not going to change them. However, you just need to make sure that you get everyone on the same page, fans and owners and everything. Then they need to have team managers or team owners. I know that the XFL team owners was more of a, we'll give you the title owner, but you're really only going to be a team manager. You're not going to make too many of the big decisions. Leave that up to the mama XFL. So they need to figure out things like that. Team owners, team fans, they need to make sure that they have the actual cities and stadiums really locked in for kickoff. And just, they need to announce those things big, because the USFL has, and the USFL is right on its way to starting in this coming April. Let me see here. Not too much more I have to say. Let me see. Going through all my notes. Let me see. We can talk about the Texans and how bad they are. Astrodome, Texans. Talk about, nothing too much that I need to cover. Just Houston stadiums, LAF. Oh, we could talk about the LAF real quick. The League of Football in Mexico. I'm not really sure what the LFA stands for. But they got out a new logo. They have a chicken team. They have a JAL team with a star and a sword. And they also have the Galgos, which is Mexican for dog. Spanish for dogs. All in all, I haven't seen really too much, but found it cool that they actually got onto the field, got off their couches. And, I think I'll bring you something, maybe a LFA thing soon. But that's all I got for now. I hope y'all enjoyed my first ever podcast, the LFA and the ELF and Houston stadiums. But the USFL is coming up quick, and I hope y'all enjoy today. I love you, and I will see you later.